You stand at a crossroads every day. One road is safe, predictable, guarded. The other is terrifying, uncertain, and full of risks. That second road, that's vulnerability. And that's where true strength lies. For years, we've been told that being vulnerable is dangerous, that it's a sign of weakness. But what if I told you that vulnerability is the birthplace of courage? That the moments you feel most exposed are the moments where you are actually the strongest for years. Society has conditioned us to see vulnerability as something to be avoided, something that makes us weak, fragile, or incapable. We are taught to keep our emotions in check, to never let others see our fears, our doubts, or our struggles. Strength, we're told, comes from having it all together, from maintaining control, from never letting them see you sweat. But what if we've had it backward all along? What if the strongest thing you could ever do is to be seen for who you really are? Vulnerability is not weakness. It is courage in its purest form. It is standing in the middle of uncertainty, knowing that you have no guarantees, and choosing to show up anyway. It is speaking your truth even when your voice shakes. It is loving with your whole heart, even when you know you could get hurt. It is stepping forward, taking the risk, and daring to fail because you believe in something bigger than your fear. Think about the moments in life that have shaped you the most, not the easy, effortless ones, but the moments that required you to step outside your comfort zone. Maybe it was the first time you said, "I love you," without knowing if they would say it back. Maybe it was raising your hand in a room full of people, sharing an idea you weren't sure would be accepted. Maybe it was starting something new, leaving a job, opening a business, moving to a new city, pursuing a dream without knowing if it would work. Every single one of those moments required vulnerability. Every single one demanded that you step into uncertainty with no armor, no protection, just raw, unfiltered courage. And yet, we still resist it. We still tell ourselves that being vulnerable makes us weak, that we have to put up walls, that we have to pretend we're fine even when we're breaking inside. We tell ourselves that if we expose too much, we'll be judged, rejected, abandoned. But here's the truth: when we numb vulnerability, we numb everything else with it. You can't selectively shut down emotions. If you close yourself off to pain, you also close yourself off to love. If you block out failure, you also block out growth. If you refuse to risk rejection, you also refuse to experience deep, authentic connection. Look at the people who inspire you the most. The artists, the leaders, the thinkers, the change makers. What do they all have in common? They've all chosen vulnerability. They've all put something on the line, whether it's their reputation, their work, their dreams, or their hearts. They've all dared to be seen, even when they weren't sure how the world would respond. Vulnerability is standing on a stage and sharing your story, knowing that some people will misunderstand you. It's walking into a room full of strangers and allowing yourself to be known, rather than hiding behind small talk. It's admitting when you don't have the answers. It's asking for help when you need it. It's saying, "I don't know," instead of pretending you do. Courage isn't about having no fear. It's about standing in the fear and showing up anyway. Vulnerability isn't about recklessly exposing every part of yourself to everyone. It's about choosing to be real with the right people. It's about letting down the walls with those who've earned the right to hear your story. It's about giving yourself permission to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to try and fail and try again. And here's the irony: when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we actually become stronger. We become more resilient, more open, more connected. We learn that rejection won't destroy us, that failure isn't fatal, and that the risk of being seen is far smaller than the regret of hiding forever. So if you've been taught to see vulnerability as a weakness, I challenge you to redefine it. I challenge you to see it for what it truly is: the most powerful act of bravery you will ever take. We all crave connection. It is wired into us as human beings the need to be seen, heard, and understood. But true connection, the kind that fills us up and gives our lives meaning, doesn't happen on the surface. It doesn't come from perfectly curated conversations, pretending to have it all together, or keeping people at arm's length. It happens when we allow ourselves to be real. It happens when we embrace vulnerability. And yet, vulnerability is often the very thing we resist the most. We tell ourselves that if we let people see the parts of us that are messy, uncertain, or imperfect, they might walk away. We believe that strength means never letting others see us struggle, and that connection comes from impressing others rather than being open with them. But the reality is, the more we hide, the more disconnected we become, not just from others, but from ourselves. Think about the moments when you felt closest to someone. Was it when everything was perfect? Or was it when you shared something raw and honest, and they responded with understanding? Was it when they opened up to you, trusting you with a part of themselves they hadn't shared with anyone else? Real connection isn't built on perfection. It's built on shared humanity, on the ability to say, me too. I've been there, I understand. We fear that vulnerability will push people away, but the truth is, it's what draws them in. When someone opens up about their struggles, their fears, or their dreams, we don't think less of them. We admire them. We feel closer to them. We see them as real, and in seeing them, we feel seen too. Yet so many of us spend our lives hiding behind walls, afraid to let people in. We mask our insecurities with achievements. We fill silence with small talk instead of meaningful conversations. We pretend we're fine when we're not, afraid that admitting our struggles will make us seem weak. But what if the very thing we're avoiding is the thing that will set us free? Think about the strongest relationships in your life. The friendships that have lasted, the people you trust the most, the ones who feel like home. Those relationships were not built on never showing emotion. They were built on shared experiences, on honesty, on the willingness to be vulnerable. When we allow ourselves to be seen, not just the polished, filtered version, but the real, unfiltered version, something powerful happens. We stop performing and start connecting. We stop striving for approval and start feeling understood. We give others permission to be vulnerable too, creating a space where true relationships can grow. Vulnerability isn't just about sharing pain or struggles, it's also about expressing love, appreciation, and gratitude. How often do we hold back from telling someone how much they mean to us because we fear looking too emotional? How often do we hesitate to say, I miss you, or I'm proud of you, or I love you, because we don't want to feel exposed? But those words spoken with sincerity are what deepen our bonds with others. They remind us that we are not alone, that we are valued, that we belong. In relationships, vulnerability is what builds trust. It's what allows us to say, I'm struggling right now, and I need support, instead of pretending we're fine. It's what helps us navigate conflicts, because rather than shutting defensive, we can say, this hurt me or I was wrong. It's what makes love real, not just the kind of love that looks good on the outside, but the kind that endures through every challenge. Embracing vulnerability means embracing authenticity. It means no longer living behind a mask, no longer seeking connection through perfection, but through honesty. It means recognizing that our flaws, our fears, and our struggles are not barriers to connection. They are the very bridges that lead us to it. Joy. It's something we all seek, something we chase, something we hope to hold on to. But true joy, the kind that fills you up, that makes you feel alive, that lingers long after the moment has passed, does not come from playing it safe. It does not come from guarding yourself, from avoiding risks, from numbing the hard emotions. It comes from vulnerability, and yet we resist vulnerability because it feels like an open door to pain. We tell ourselves that if we don't get too attached, we won't get hurt. If we don't hope too much, we won't be disappointed. If we don't love too deeply, we won't suffer loss. But in shielding ourselves from the possibility of pain, we also shut ourselves off from the possibility of real joy. You cannot selectively numb emotions. If you try to avoid sadness, you also dull your ability to feel happiness. If you push away fear, you push away excitement. If you refuse to feel grief, you also limit your capacity for love. Vulnerability is the key that unlocks the full spectrum of human experience. And without it, joy becomes shallow, temporary, fleeting. And think about the moments in life when you have felt the most joy, not just happiness, but deep, soul-shaking joy. Maybe it was looking into the eyes of someone you love and feeling completely seen. Maybe it was standing in front of a dream you worked for, realizing it had finally come true. Maybe it was laughing until you couldn't breathe, letting go of every worry for just a moment. Now think about what those moments had in common. Every one of them required vulnerability. Loving someone deeply means risking loss. Chasing a dream means risking failure. Expressing joy itself is a form of vulnerability, because when we are fully present in a moment, we acknowledge that it is fleeting. And that's what makes it so precious. Many of us have become afraid of joy because we associate it with what might follow. We brace ourselves for disappointment, convinced that if we let ourselves feel too happy, something will come along to take it away. This is what some call foreboding joy, the habit of pulling back from happiness, because we fear that pain is waiting just around the corner. But what if instead of guarding ourselves, we leaned in? What if Instead of holding back our joy out of fear, we allowed ourselves to embrace it fully. What if we stopped seeing vulnerability as a risk and started seeing it as the only way to truly live? Think about a parent holding their newborn child overwhelmed with love and fear at the same time. That love is vulnerability. That fear is vulnerability. But would they trade that moment for anything? Think about the artist who puts their soul into their work, sharing a piece of themselves with the world. They risk rejection, but without that risk, there would be no art, no passion, no beauty. Think about the person who opens their heart to love again after being hurt. They know they could be wounded, but they also know that love is worth the risk. Joy is not found in avoiding pain. It is found in embracing life fully, in allowing ourselves to feel everything: love, loss, hope, fear, excitement, uncertainty. It is found in showing up, in opening our hearts, in saying yes to the experiences that move us, even when we don't know where they will lead. The people who experience the deepest joy are not the ones who have never known pain. They are the ones who have allowed themselves to feel it all, who have not closed themselves off, who have chosen to live with open hearts despite the risks. Vulnerability is not just the path to joy, it is the very thing that makes joy possible. Failure, rejection. Two words that carry so much weight, so much fear, so much avoidance. We live in a world that glorifies success, but rarely talks about the road that leads there, a road paved with setbacks, missteps, and moments of doubt. From a young age, we are taught that failing is something to be ashamed of, that rejection means we are not good enough. But the truth is, failure and rejection are not signs to stop. They are not evidence that we are unworthy. They are lessons, sometimes painful, sometimes uncomfortable, but always necessary for growth. If you look at anyone who has ever achieved something great, you will see a trail of failures behind them. Every entrepreneur who built a successful company has faced rejection from investors, setbacks in their plans, and ideas that didn't work. Every artist who created something meaningful has faced criticism, self-doubt, and moments when they thought about giving up. Every athlete who has stood on a podium has lost more times than they have won. But what separates them from those who quit is this: they did not see failure as the end. They saw it as a lesson. Rejection stings. It can make you question yourself, your worth, your abilities. Whether it's a job you didn't get, a relationship that didn't work out, or a dream that didn't unfold the way you hoped, rejection has a way of making us feel small. But here's what we often forget: rejection is not a reflection of our value. It is simply redirection. It is life pushing us towards something different, something better, something that aligns with who we are meant to become. Think about the moments in your life when things didn't go the way you planned. Maybe you didn't get the job you wanted, but later realized it led you to an opportunity that was a better fit. Maybe you poured your heart into a relationship that ended, but looking back, you can see that it wasn't the right one for you. Maybe you launched a project that didn't take off, only to find that the lessons you learned from that failure helped you succeed later. We don't grow from the things that come easily. We grow from the moments that challenge us, the moments that force us to dig deeper, to try again, to approach things differently. Every failure carries a lesson, and every rejection is an invitation to reassess, to refine, to come back stronger. The problem is not failure itself, the problem is how we define it. If we see failure as proof that we are incapable, we will stop trying. But if we see failure as feedback, as information, as part of the process, we will keep moving forward. Some of the greatest successes in history were built on a foundation of failure. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times before inventing the light bulb. J.K. Rowling was rejected by multiple publishers before Harry Potter became a global phenomenon. Oprah Winfrey was told early in her career that she wasn't fit for television. Imagine if they had let those failures define them. Imagine if they had taken rejection as a sign to stop rather than a sign to keep going. Failure humbles us. It teaches us resilience. It forces us to let go of perfectionism, to embrace the process, to trust that even when things don't go as planned, we are still moving forward. It is not a detour from success. It is the path to it. Rejection does not mean you are not good enough. It means that what is meant for you is still ahead. Failure does not mean you have reached the end. It means you are still learning, still growing, still becoming the person you were meant to be. Shame is one of the most powerful and destructive emotions we can experience. It whispers in our ears that we are not enough, that we are unworthy of love, that if people knew the truth about us, our failures, our mistakes, our insecurities, they would turn away. Shame is different from guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. It attacks our very sense of self-worth, convincing us that we must hide parts of ourselves to be accepted. And shame has one requirement to survive: secrecy. Shame feeds on silence. It grows in the dark, in the unspoken thoughts, in the secrets we keep, even from those closest to us. The more we try to hide it, the stronger it becomes. The more we let it convince us that we must carry it alone, the deeper its roots go. But there is one thing that shame cannot survive: vulnerability. Vulnerability is the act of bringing shame into the light. It is choosing to speak the words we were taught to keep buried. It is allowing ourselves to be seen, even when we fear judgment. It is standing in our truth and realizing that our worth is not defined by our mistakes, our past, or the opinions of others. Think about a time you carried shame about something you regretted, something you struggled with, something you felt you had to keep hidden. Now think about the moment you finally spoke about it. Maybe it was with a friend, a therapist, a loved one, or even just writing it down for yourself. Do you remember the relief? The way the weight seemed a little lighter? The way you realized you were not alone? That is the power of vulnerability. It strips shame of its power. The fear of judgment is what keeps us silent, but in reality, when we open up, we often find the opposite of what we expect. Instead of rejection, we find understanding. Instead of judgment, we find connection. Because the truth is, everyone carries shame in some form. Everyone has. Moments they wish they could erase. Everyone has insecurities, fears, and regrets. When we are brave enough to be vulnerable, we give others permission to do the same. Shame tells us you are alone. Vulnerability reminds us you are not. The irony is that we often admire vulnerability in others but fear it in ourselves. We are drawn to people who are honest about their struggles because they make us feel less alone. We respect people who own their imperfections because it gives us the courage to own ours. And yet when it comes to ourselves, we hesitate. We tell ourselves that our shame is different, that our struggles are worse, that if we were truly seen, we would be rejected. But the truth is, the more we hide, the more isolated we become. And the more we share, the more we realize how deeply we are connected. This is not to say that vulnerability is easy. It takes courage to open up about things we have spent years hiding. It takes strength to say, this is me, fully and completely. It takes trust to believe that we are still worthy, even with our scars. But vulnerability is not about exposing yourself to just anyone. It is about choosing to share with those who have earned the right to hear your story. It is about creating spaces where honesty is met with compassion. The moment we break the silence, shame begins to lose its grip. The moment we name our struggles, they become less powerful. The moment we realize that we are not alone, we step out of the darkness and into healing. Because shame cannot survive in the light of vulnerability. It cannot thrive where there is honesty, connection, and self-acceptance. And when we choose to be vulnerable, we don't just free ourselves, we give others the courage to do the same. Shame is a silent poison. It creeps in quietly, taking root in the darkest corners of our minds, convincing us that we are unworthy, unlovable, and fundamentally flawed. Unlike guilt, which tells us I made a mistake, shame whispers, I am the mistake. It feeds on our fears of rejection, making us believe that if people truly knew us, our struggles, our past, our insecurities, they would turn away. But shame has one critical weakness. It cannot survive being spoken. It thrives in secrecy, in the things we refuse to say out loud, in the stories we lock away. The more we keep it hidden, the stronger it becomes. The more we isolate ourselves in silence, the more it convinces us that we are alone. But when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, when we bring our shame into the light, it begins to lose its power. Vulnerability is the antidote to shame. To be vulnerable means to be seen fully, without the performance, without the desperate attempt to prove we are someone we're not. It means stepping into the discomfort of honesty, even when every part of us wants to retreat into silence. It means saying, this is who I am, this is what I've been through, and I am still worthy. Shame tells us to hide, but vulnerability invites us to connect. Think about the moments when you have felt most connected to another person. Was it when everything was perfect? Or was it when someone shared something real, something raw, something honest? Maybe it was when a friend admitted they were struggling and you realized you weren't alone in your own battles. Maybe it was when someone shared a story that mirrored your own pain, making you feel seen for the first time. We often believe that if we reveal our true selves, people will judge us. But in reality, the opposite is usually true. When we are honest about our struggles, we create space for deeper connection. When we share our fears, our insecurities, our regrets, we give others permission to do the same. And in that moment, shame loses its grip. Shame isolates, but vulnerability builds bridges. But vulnerability isn't easy. It requires courage. It requires a willingness to step into uncertainty without knowing how others will respond. It means taking the risk of saying, "This is me," and trusting that we will still be accepted. One of the most dangerous lies shame tells us is that we are alone in our struggles. It convinces us that everyone else has it all together, that we are the only ones who feel broken, unworthy, or afraid. But the truth is, every single person carries shame in some form. Every single person has moments they wish they could erase, parts of themselves they hesitate to reveal. And yet, when we dare to share our truth, we discover something life-changing. We are not alone. This is why vulnerability is so powerful. It doesn't just free us from our own shame, it allows others to do the same. When we are open about our imperfections, we create an environment where others feel safe to do the same. When we refuse to hide, we show others that they don't have to hide either. But vulnerability doesn't mean sharing everything with everyone. It's about choosing the right people, those who have earned the right to hear our story. It's about creating spaces where honesty is met with compassion, where struggle is met with support, where mistakes are met with understanding rather than judgment. Shame wants us to believe that our worth is tied to perfection. But vulnerability teaches us that true strength comes from honesty, from authenticity, from the willingness to be seen exactly as we are. It teaches us that we don't have to carry our burdens alone, that healing begins the moment we speak our truth, that the things we once thought made us unworthy are the very things that make us human. And when we choose vulnerability, we don't just dismantle shame for ourselves, we create a world where others feel safe to do the same. Courage is often misunderstood. We tend to think of it as strength, as fearlessness, as the ability to push forward without hesitation. We picture warriors, leaders, and heroes standing tall in the face of adversity, unshaken, unbreakable. But real courage, the kind that changes lives, the kind that transforms us, is not about being fearless. It is about being vulnerable. Courage and vulnerability are not opposites. They're inseparable. You cannot be courageous without first being vulnerable. Every act of bravery requires stepping into uncertainty, into risk, into the unknown. Every moment of courage demands that we open ourselves up to failure, rejection, or disappointment. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is the very foundation of strength. Think about the bravest moments in your life. Maybe it was standing up for what you believed in, even when your voice shook. Maybe it was telling someone how you really felt, not knowing if they would say it back. Maybe it was starting something new, a job, a relationship, a dream without any guarantees of success. Every single one of those moments required vulnerability. Every single one required the willingness to take a risk, to put yourself out there, to step into a space where you could be hurt, but chose to show up anyway. We are often taught to avoid vulnerability, to protect ourselves from pain by staying guarded. We convince ourselves that if we never let people see the real us, they can never reject us. If we never take the risk, we can never fail. If we never open our hearts, they can never be broken. But in trying to protect ourselves from pain, we also shield ourselves from joy, from connection, from growth. Living without vulnerability is not safety, it is stagnation. Courage requires the willingness to be seen fully and completely. It means speaking up when it would be easier to stay silent. It means showing emotion when it would be easier to shut down. It means trying even when failure is a possibility. It means embracing uncertainty instead of running from it. The greatest leaders, creators, and visionaries throughout history did not achieve greatness by playing it safe. They stepped into the unknown, took risks, and allowed themselves to be vulnerable in front of the world. They understood that failure was a possibility, but they did not let it stop them. They knew that courage was not about avoiding fear, but about facing it head on. Think about love. It is one of the most beautiful and rewarding experiences we can have, yet it is also one of the most vulnerable. To love someone deeply means opening yourself up to the possibility of loss, of heartbreak, of being hurt. And yet we love anyway, because we know that a life without love is not truly living. That is courage in its purest form. Think about creativity. Every artist, writer, musician, and innovator puts a piece of themselves into their work, sharing it with the world without knowing how it will be received. It is an act of vulnerability to create something and allow others to see it, to judge it, to criticize it. But without that willingness to be vulnerable, there would be no art, no music, no innovation, no progress. Think about personal growth. Change is uncomfortable. Growth requires stepping into the unknown, into spaces where we are unsure, where we might fail, where we might struggle. It is much easier to stay where things are predictable, where we feel in control. But nothing truly worthwhile is found in comfort zones. Every meaningful transformation begins with the courage to be vulnerable, to acknowledge our fears, to take the first uncertain step forward. The people we admire, most the ones who inspire us, who lead us, who make a difference, are not the ones who pretend to be invincible. They are the ones who show up, who take risks, who dare to be vulnerable despite the fear. They are the ones who embrace uncertainty, knowing that the greatest rewards come from the greatest risks. Courage is not about never falling. It is about getting back up. Vulnerability is not about exposing weakness. It is about embracing our humanity. And together, they create a life that is not just safe, but meaningful, authentic, and full of possibility. There is power in owning your story, not just the good parts, not just the moments of success, or the highlights you feel proud to share, but all of it, the struggles, the heartbreaks, the moments you thought you wouldn't make it through. Owning your story means embracing every chapter, even the ones that are messy, even the ones you once wanted to forget. It means refusing to let shame or fear define you. It means standing in your truth and saying, this is who I am, and I am still worthy. But that isn't always easy. Many of us spend years running from our stories. We bury our pain, rewrite our past in ways that feel more acceptable, or hide certain parts of ourselves because we fear judgment. We convince ourselves that if we pretend those difficult moments never happened, they will lose their power over us. But the opposite is true. What we suppress doesn't disappear. It controls us from the shadows. What we refuse to acknowledge keeps us trapped. We cannot fully step into our power until we stop running and start owning every part of who we are. When you own your story, you reclaim your voice. No one else gets to tell you who you are. No one else gets to define you by your worst moments. No one else gets to decide what your past means. When you take ownership of your story, you take control of the narrative. You shift from being a victim of your circumstances to being the author of your life. You recognize that while you may not have chosen every experience, you do get to choose what you do with it. You get to decide whether your pain will hold you back or push you forward. Owning your story also sets you free. Shame thrives in secrecy. It convinces us that if people knew the truth about us, they would turn away. It makes us feel like we have to keep parts of ourselves hidden to be accepted. But when we finally say, this is my story, and I'm not ashamed, we take away its power. We realize that our worth was never tied to perfection. We understand that the very things we once thought made us unlovable are often the things that connect us most deeply to others. And that's another truth about owning your story. It creates connection. We live in a world that often celebrates perfection, but perfection is an illusion. No one has a flawless story. Everyone has struggles, wounds, regrets. And yet so many people walk around pretending they don't. When you are brave enough to own your story, you give others permission to do the same. You show them that they are not alone, that their experiences do not make them unworthy, that healing begins when we stop hiding and start embracing who we truly are. Think about the people who inspire you most. Are they the ones who seem untouchable, who have never struggled, who have never failed? Or are they the ones who have walked through darkness and come out stronger? The ones who have faced rejection, loss, or pain but refused to let it define them. The ones who have owned their stories and in doing so have helped others find the courage to own theirs. Owning your story does not mean you are proud of every moment. It does not mean you have no regrets or that every chapter was easy to write. It means you have made peace with where you have been. It means you no longer let shame or fear dictate your future. It means you choose to stand in your truth rather than let the world define it for you. Your story, every part of it, has shaped you. It has given you wisdom, resilience, and strength. It has made you who you are. And when you fully embrace it, you step into a power that no one can take away from you.